She looked across that rooftop pool, saw a 9-year-old black boy sitting quietly at the edge of the water, and reached for her phone. He wasn't making noise. He wasn't bothering anyone. He had his lemonade in his hands and his feet in the water and a towel folded on the chair beside him. He had every right to be there. His father had called ahead. The front desk had confirmed it. There was nothing wrong. But she called security anyway. And when the guard arrived, young, uncertain, eager to please the wrong person, she watched that little boy climb out of the pool without a word, wrap a towel around his wet shoulders, and stand on the warm concrete, not knowing what he had done wrong, because he hadn't done anything wrong. And then, satisfied, she turned back to her magazine. And she said it, loud enough for everyone on that terrace to hear. Casual, final, like it was simply the truth. He was dirtying the water. What she didn't know, what nobody on that rooftop knew, was that somewhere above them, on the top floor of that building, a man had just received a notification on his phone. A man with dragon tattoos crawling up his neck and a silence around him that made grown men step out of doorways. A man who owned that pool, who owned that terrace, who owned that entire floor she had been living on for 3 years without ever once asking who signed the deed. A man who had just heard every word she said about his son. The elevator doors were already opening, and what happened next changed everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. The sun over Chicago that afternoon was the kind that made everything look clean. It fell across the rooftop pool in long golden sheets, catching the water surface and breaking it into 1,000 small lights. The kind of afternoon that felt, at first, like nothing important could possibly happen. Jordan came down alone, the way he had learned to do most things since his mother passed. He pressed the elevator button with 2 fingers, wrote it in silence, and stepped out into the warm air holding his towel folded under one arm and a plastic cup of lemonade in the other hand. He was 9 years old, and he was proud of himself for remembering the lemonade. He had only lived in this building for 3 months. 3 months since his father's people had come to collect him from this small apartment on the south side where his aunt had been looking after him. 3 months since he had seen, for the first time, the man with the quiet eyes and the dark ink crawling up his neck. The man who said almost nothing that first day, but who looked at Jordan for a long time, the way people look at something they have been searching for, and almost stopped believing they would find. Jordan did not fully understand what his father did. He understood the suits. He understood the way other men moved out of doorways when Jang Min-Ho walked through them. He understood that the building they lived in was not like other buildings, that the elevator required a key, that the pool on the roof was private, and that private meant it belonged to the people who lived there. His father had told the front desk. He was allowed. He set his towel on a chair near the shallow end and sat on the edge, dropping his feet into the water. It was cold and perfect. He swirled his ankles slowly, watching the small circles spread outward and dissolve before they reached the drain. He was not bothering anyone. He was not making noise. He was simply there, the way children are simply there, present, unhurried, asking nothing from the world except a moment of peace. He did not notice her at first. Victoria Caldwell had been on the other side of the pool for the better part of an hour. She was the kind of woman who had long ago decided that comfort was her right and inconvenience was other people's fault. She lay on her chair with a magazine she had not been reading, a drink she had been sipping slowly, and the particular vigilance of someone who monitors their surroundings, not out of curiosity, but out of ownership. She noticed Jordan the moment the elevator opened. She watched him walk to the chair. She watched him set down his towel. She watched him lower himself to the edge of the pool. And something inside her, something she would never have named out loud, not in those words, decided, before he had touched the water, that he did not belong there. She waited. She watched him sit quietly for 4 full minutes. Then she put down her magazine. What happened next was not loud. It was not violent. It was the particular cruelty of people who have learned to harm others while maintaining perfect composure. The cruelty that wears the face of concern, that speaks in measured tones, that calls the guard not because there is danger, but because there is a child who looks wrong in a place that feels like theirs. She stood. She smoothed her cover-up. She walked to the edge of her side of the pool and called out across the water in a voice that was polite the way a locked door is polite. "Excuse me, do you live here?" Jordan looked up. He held his lemonade in both hands. "Yes, ma'am. My dad told the front desk." She smiled, the way people smile when they have already decided not to believe you, and she reached for her phone. The security guard's name was Travis. He was 26 years old, 8 weeks into the job, and had not yet learned the most important thing about working in a building like this one, that the people who complained the loudest were not always the people with the most authority. He had learned the uniform, the radio codes, the names of the floors. He had not yet learned when to stand still and do nothing. He came through the rooftop door with the careful walk of someone trying to look confident, and he saw immediately what he was dealing with. A woman on one side of the pool with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, and a child on the other side, feet still in the water, watching him approach with the particular stillness of a boy who had been through enough to know that stillness was safer than movement. Travis looked at Jordan. He looked at Victoria. He made the calculation that people in uncertain positions always make. He sided with the one who looked more certain. "Hey, buddy," he said, and the word buddy did the work that more honest words would not. "Can you step out of the water for me? Just for a second. We just need to check something." Jordan did not argue. He had learned, in 9 years of living in a world that made these kinds of requests of him, that arguing made things worse. He placed his lemonade on the tile, pressed his palms flat against the edge, and lifted himself out of the pool in one smooth motion. He stood dripping on the warm concrete, reached for his towel, and wrapped it around his shoulders. He stood there, waiting, the way children wait when they do not understand what they have done wrong, but have already accepted that they will be asked to explain it. Victoria did not look at him. She had already returned to her chair. She reached into her white straw bag, took out her magazine, and opened it to a page she had no intention of reading. She had made her complaint. She considered the matter handled. In her mind, the next few minutes would unfold the way these things always unfolded. The child would be escorted out, the afternoon would return to its proper shape, and she would have done nothing wrong, technically, nothing she could be accused of, technically, because she had only asked a question and made a call. It was in that moment, that exact, ordinary, unremarkable moment, that she said it. She said it the way people say things they believe are private when they are not private at all. She said it in the tone of a conclusion, a summary, the last word on the subject that no longer interested her. She had turned back to her magazine, and she spoke just loud enough for the two other residents on the far end of the terrace to hear, because some things are more satisfying when witnessed. These kids find their way into every space. He was dirtying the water. The two residents looked at each other and looked away. Travis looked at the ground. Jordan heard it. He heard every word with the clarity that children have when the world is teaching them something they will carry for the rest of their lives. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the edges of the towel at his chest. He did not cry. He had been taught, in the quiet and serious way that certain lessons are taught, that tears in front of strangers cost more than they returned. But his eyes went red at the corners, and he stood completely still, and he looked out at the pool that he had been allowed to be in, that he had done nothing wrong in, that he had sat beside for less than 10 minutes. And he tried to understand what about him had made that woman reach for her phone before he had even touched the water. He was still standing there, towel around his shoulders, lemonade forgotten on the tile, when the elevator at the far end of the terrace opened. He did not hear it at first, but Travis did. And the two residents at the far end did. And Victoria, who had her magazine open and her eyes down, became aware of it not through sound, but through a shift in the quality of the silence around her. The specific silence that falls over a room, or a rooftop, or any space at all, when someone has entered it who changes the air simply by being present. She looked up slowly, the way people look up when something in them already knows they do not want to see what is there. Jang Min-Ho walked out into the afternoon light. He was not hurrying. He never hurried. He wore a dark suit and a white shirt open at the collar, and the ink on his neck caught the sun the same way the water had, in fragments, in flashes, in something that demanded to be looked at and simultaneously warned you against looking too long. Two men came through the door behind him and stopped. He did not stop. He crossed the terrace in a straight line toward his son. He crouched down in front of Jordan. This tall, composed, quietly terrifying man folded himself down to the level of a 9-year-old, and he placed both hands on the sides of the boy's face, and he said something that no one else could hear. Whatever it was, Jordan nodded. Once, slowly, the way you nod when someone has just handed you back something you thought was lost. Jang Min-Ho stood up. He turned around, and he looked at Victoria Caldwell for the first time. Victoria Caldwell had spent 41 years learning how to hold a room. She knew how to walk into a restaurant and be seated without waiting. She knew how to speak to building staff in a tone that was never quite rude enough to be called rude. She knew how to make people feel, without saying anything actionable, that they were in the wrong place. These were not skills she had studied. They were instincts she had refined, slowly and without awareness, the way people refine anything they practice every day without naming it. None of them worked now. Jang Min-Ho did not move toward her immediately. He stood where he was, at the center of the terrace, one hand resting at his side, the other having just released his son's shoulder. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is deciding how to handle. Not with anger, not with heat, but with the cold and unhurried attention of someone who has never once in his adult life needed to raise his voice to be understood. Victoria stood. She did not plan to stand. Her body made the decision before her mind caught up. The way bodies respond to threats they recognize before the conscious self is willing to admit recognition. She opened her mouth. I didn't know he was your son, she said. You knew he was a child, Jang said. The words were quiet. They were the quietest words spoken on that rooftop all afternoon. and they landed harder than anything louder could have. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The sentence was complete in itself, sealed at both ends, leaving no space for the justification she was already constructing behind her eyes. She tried again. I was only concerned. I didn't recognize him, and there was no adult present, so I simply— You said he was dirtying the water. It was not a question. It was a repetition. Flat, precise. The verbal equivalent of placing a piece of evidence on a table and stepping back. He had cameras throughout the building's common areas. He had been notified within 90 seconds of Travis arriving on the rooftop. He had heard the words before he stepped off the elevator. He was not here to discover what had happened. He was here because of what he had already heard, and he wanted her to know that he had heard it. Victoria's mouth closed. Something moved across her face. Not quite shame, not quite fear, but the particular expression of a person who has been caught not in a lie, but in a truth about themselves they preferred to keep private. The two residents at the far end of the terrace had stopped pretending to be elsewhere. Travis had taken 2 steps back and found a place to stand where he was present without being involved. The afternoon, which had begun as nothing, had become the kind of moment that everyone on that rooftop would describe in detail for years. Jang turned away from her. He turned to the building's general manager, a man named Robert Chen, who had come up in the second elevator the moment the head of security had radioed down, because there were certain residents in this building whose notifications went directly to him and triggered a different category of response. What Jang said to Robert Chen, he said quietly and without theater. He did not threaten. He did not gesture. He spoke for approximately 45 seconds, and when he finished, Robert Chen nodded once with the expression of a man who understands that a decision has been made, and that his role now is to execute it cleanly. Victoria was watching from across the terrace. She could not hear the words. She did not need to. She had spent enough years in rooms where power moved quietly to recognize the shape of what was happening. Something was being decided, something that involved her, and she was not part of the conversation. She looked at Jordan. He was sitting on the edge of a pool chair now, lemonade back in his hands, watching his father with an expression that was equal parts awe and relief. He was not looking at her. He had, in the way that children sometimes mercifully do, already moved past her. Not forgiven, not forgotten, simply deprioritized, because his father was there now, and his father was handling it, and that was enough. This, somehow, was the thing that reached her. Not the man in the dark suit, not the 2 men by the elevator door, not Robert Chen's careful nod. It was the child who had stopped paying attention to her, who had simply, cleanly returned to his lemonade as though she no longer occupied enough of the world to be worth watching. She picked up her bag. She put on her sandals. She walked to the elevator without being asked to leave, because leaving on your own is the last form of dignity available to a person who has lost every other kind. And Victoria Caldwell had always, above everything, understood the importance of appearances. The elevator doors closed behind her. On the terrace, the afternoon continued. The water caught the light. Jordan finished his lemonade. His father sat down in the chair beside him and said nothing for a while, which was, Jordan was beginning to understand, one of the ways his father showed that everything was all right. Everything was not yet over for Victoria, but she did not know that yet. She would find out in 3 days. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. It was slipped under the door of Unit 34B the way all formal correspondence in that building was delivered. in a cream-colored envelope with the building management's insignia embossed on the upper left corner, clean and impersonal. The kind of envelope that gives nothing away before you open it. Victoria found it when she came out of the bedroom in her robe, heading for the kitchen. She almost stepped over it. She picked it up with the mild curiosity of someone who expects nothing consequential from the mail, and she stood in the hallway and read it. And then she read it again. The language was precise and courteous, the way language is when it has been written by people who understand that courtesy and devastation are not mutually exclusive. The lease on Unit 34B would not be renewed at the end of the current term. The decision was final. No further explanation was provided because none was legally required. The management thanked the Caldwell family for their residency and wished them well in their future arrangements. Victoria stood in the hallway for a long time. Her husband, when she told him, made phone calls. He was a partner at a law firm, and he knew how to apply pressure through the correct channels, and he spent the better part of that Thursday afternoon doing exactly that. Calling Robert Chen, calling the building's legal representation, pulling up the lease agreement and reading it with the attention of a man looking for a foothold. He found nothing. The lease was clean. The termination was within the owner's rights. The owner, it turned out, the detail her husband uncovered late that afternoon while cross-referencing the building's property records, was not a faceless real estate holding company the way they had always assumed. The owner was a private individual. The owner had a name. Her husband said the name out loud once, sitting at the kitchen table with the property records on his laptop screen. Then he closed the laptop. He did not make any more phone calls. There are moments in a life when a person is given the opportunity to understand something true about themselves. Not something flattering, not something they would choose to see, but something real. Something that has been there the whole time, operating quietly beneath the surface of every assumption they have ever made about who they are and what they deserve, and how the world is organized, and where they stand within it. These moments are rarely comfortable. They are rarely welcome. And they are almost never arrived at through argument or confrontation. They arrive, most often, through consequence, through the specific and irreversible weight of what happens after. Victoria did not have a revelation. It would be too clean, too convenient, to say that she stood in her hallway on a Thursday morning and understood everything she had gotten wrong. People do not work that way. Understanding arrives slowly, or not at all, and often it disguises itself as grievance long before it becomes anything resembling clarity. But something shifted. Some small and stubborn thing that had lived for years inside her chest. The certainty, the unexamined and automatic certainty that certain spaces were hers to protect, and certain presences were hers to question, loosened slightly, the way a knot loosens when enough tension has been applied from the other direction. She thought about the boy. She thought about the way he had looked when he climbed out of the pool. Not defiant, not angry, just still. Just waiting, just a child holding a towel around his shoulders on a warm afternoon, trying to understand what he had done wrong. She thought about what she had said. She heard it again in her own voice, the way we always hear our worst moments in our own voice, when the noise around them finally goes quiet. He was dirtying the water. She had said it about a 9-year-old child who was sitting quietly at the edge of a pool, bothering no one, asking for nothing except to be left alone in a space he was fully entitled to occupy. She had said it because something about his presence had unsettled her, and she had never once, not for a single moment before this one, asked herself why. That question, the one she had never asked, was the one that would stay with her longest. Not the letter, not the lease, not the phone calls her husband had stopped making. The question was, why had she reached for her phone before the boy had even touched the water? She did not have an answer she was proud of. Upstairs, on the top floor of the same building, Jordan was sitting at the kitchen counter while his father stood on the other side making ramen. Real ramen, not the kind from a packet, the kind that took time, that required attention, that filled the apartment with a smell that Jordan was slowly coming to associate with safety. He had his chin resting in his hands, and he was watching his father move around the kitchen with the focused, quiet fascination of a child who is still in the early stages of learning someone and finds every detail worth cataloging. He thought about the afternoon. He thought about the woman and the guard, and the moment he had climbed out of the pool and stood dripping on the warm tile, not knowing what to do with himself. He thought about the elevator doors opening. He thought about his father crossing the terrace without hurrying, crouching down, putting both hands on his face. He thought about what his father had said to him in that moment, low enough that only he could hear it. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. He had nodded then because the words were true, and because his father had said them, and because some truths land differently when they are spoken out loud by the right person at the right moment in the right place. They do not just inform you, they settle into you. They become part of the structure of how you understand yourself going forward. Jang Min-Ho set the bowl on the counter in front of his son. Steam rose from it in a slow curl. He sat down on the other side, folded his hands around his own bowl, and looked at Jordan the way he had been learning to look at him, openly, without the guardedness that defined every other relationship in his life, with something that was still new enough to feel unfamiliar, but that he was determined not to waste. Jordan blew carefully on a spoonful of broth. He looked up. "Dad," he said, "why was she scared of you?" Jang Min-Ho was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone avoiding the question, but the silence of someone giving it the weight it deserved. "Because she learned too late," he said, "to respect what she didn't know." Jordan considered this. He blew on another spoonful. "She didn't know me either," he said. "And she wasn't scared of me. She was something else." Jang looked at his son across the counter. The steam rose between them. "Yes," he said quietly. "She was." Neither of them said anything else for a while. They ate. The city moved below them, indifferent and enormous, the way cities are. And in a building where one woman was sitting with a letter she had not expected, learning something about the distance between power and decency, a man and his son shared a bowl of ramen in a kitchen that was slowly, carefully, becoming a home. Some lessons arrive as revelations, others arrive as evictions. And some, the ones that matter most, the ones that rearrange something permanent inside a person, arrive as a child blowing on a spoonful of soup, saying something simple and true that the adults around him had not thought to say first. The water that afternoon had been perfectly clean. It always had been. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a space where someone decided, before you even opened your mouth, that you didn't belong there? Not because of anything you did, but simply because of who you are. And have you ever witnessed someone being treated as invisible until the moment the world revealed exactly who they were? The woman in this story didn't lose her home because of one afternoon. She lost it because of one assumption she never thought to question. An assumption she had been making her whole life, without once asking herself why. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the courage it takes to belong, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.